Good evening, everybody, or good morning, whatever time zone you may be in. We're delighted to have you here. I'm Gloria Felt. I'm co-founder and president of Take the Lead, and this is our virtual happy hour for May. And we are very excited today to have Bennett, Manterrupting, and various other gender bilingual communications issues as we start our Take the Lead virtual happy hour. Take the Lead's mission is to prepare, develop, inspire, and propel women to take their fair and equal share of leadership positions across all sectors by 2025. So therefore, the hashtag we'd love you to use, hashtag 25, not 95. The World Economic Forum says it'll be 2095, but we're going to make sure that we get to leadership parity far before that, and we want to make sure that you all get to parity, and we're going to get there together. Do check out taketheleadwomen.com, our website, to get the latest on our courses, our workshops, our keynotes for yourself as an individual or for your organization. I'm really excited to tell you that I'll be teaching my 9 leadership power tools to accelerate your career course. It's entirely online. It takes 4 weeks. It's a lot of fun, and but you can do it on the beach. You can do it in your pajamas. You can do it from anywhere. You can do it on your iPhone. You can use your computer, whatever you like. It's all asynchronous, and it's coming up starting July 26th. So you'll be hearing more about that. We'll be telling you a lot more later on. Take the Lead is to present free virtual happy hours every month as part of our Take the Lead Presents feature. We want you to have an opportunity to see and learn from women who inspire you and can tell you how they did what they have done and what makes them successful. Every month we have a new presenter and a new topic. Next month, just to give you a little preview, June 10th, mark that down, the amazing Jamia Wilson, president of Women Action Media, will get you pumped up about media activism and how media shapes women's leadership aspirations. July will feature a special surprise guest, and in August we'll have Dr. Marcia Reynolds, who is an expert in helping us learn how to deal with those difficult conversations that make us all step back a little bit. So again, check out our website, taketheleadwomen.com. You can always find out the latest schedule and updates, and most important, to book us for your company or your organization. We'd love to come and talk with you further. You can also sign up for Take the Lead This Week, our weekly newsletter, to get a news digest, fast and fun and interesting, where we break down the biggest news in women's leadership, so you can read it in 5 minutes or less. And do tell a friend. We want your questions tonight. So before I start talking with Jessica, I just want to remind you that we'd love to get your questions. You can go ahead and start tweeting them into us if you want to, at @TakeLeadWomen. You can also go to the chat box that's right under the video on your screen, and you can start sending the questions in. When you do that, remember to set your name and location for the Q&A under the video stream, and you select that little pencil icon, then you type in your name and your location, and you click OK, and we'll get your questions, and we will start answering them as soon as we start getting them from you. So, all right, so we're about ready to go. You can use the Twitter handles that you can see here on your screen, at TakeLeadWomen, Bennett, at Gloria Felt, and again, please use the hashtag 25, not 95, to spread the word about how we're going to get to leadership parity much faster than anyone thinks we will. And stay connected by following us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and at Take the Lead Women on both of those, and our community circle on Mighty Bell as well. Okay, I think let's get started. How about that? Grab your favorite cocktail, a cup of tea, a glass of wine, whatever you like for the virtual happy hour, and here we go. Jessica, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the virtual happy hour. We are honored and thrilled to have you here. Jessica Bennett is a nationally renowned journalist. She is a columnist for Time magazine, covering the intersection of gender, sexuality, business, and pop culture, which I gotta tell you sounds like the most fun job I could possibly think of.
It's pretty fun.
Editor to Lean In, yeah, leanin.org, one of our most esteemed partners. And she has written for all kinds of publications nationally, the New York Times. She's been honored by the Society of Professional Journalists, GLAAD, and the New York Press Club, many other awards that she's received, and well-deserved. When I read her much-shared article on Manterrupting, I knew we had to have Jessica do our virtual happy hour with us. So, Jessica, did you invent the word Manterrupting?
Kind of, but I don't know if I deserve all the credit. It sort of was taken from, you know, mansplaining, manspreading. It's the whole thing with this language now. So I just added it to rupting.
Well, it has certainly entered the lingo, and it's going to be there forever. It will be in the new words for 2015, I'm quite sure. Jessica, tell us a little bit. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's part of the new, what I like to call the new vocabulary.
Vocabulary. Fantastic. Tell us a little bit about your personal background. How did you come to be a journalist? Why did you decide to do that? How did you come to be writing for such great publications as the Times and Newsweek and Time Magazine?
I was one of those people who always knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a journalist since I was a young kid, and so it was just a matter of making it happen. So I went to college in Boston, and then I moved to New York after college, and I did about 1 million different internships. And of course, right at the time I was moving to the city was when journalism was kind of imploding, and you know, businesses were going out of business, and everybody was moving online, and so it was a scary time to enter into the industry, but I ended up getting a job at Newsweek, which was my first staff writing job, and it was there that I kind of honed my chops and really started thinking about gender issues. And it was actually through the story of the women of Newsweek magazine who sued the company for gender discrimination in 1970 that I kind of came to own my own voice as it relates to writing about and caring about and thinking about gender issues and feminism. And what happened was that a lot of the young women at the magazine were feeling like they were not having their voices heard. You know, we talk about Manterrupting. We spend a lot of time in pitch meetings, and a lot of us would not speak up. And we weren't rising up the ladder as fast as we wanted to. And so it was through this struggle and talking with each other on staff that we actually learned about the story of the women who'd come before us. And so on the 40th anniversary of their lawsuit, we did an article about their legacy. And I've pretty much been writing about gender and women's issues since then.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that lawsuit? Because I'm guessing there are many people who don't know the lawsuit that did happen 40 years ago.
Yeah, so it's pretty amazing. So back in the 60s and early 70s, women who wanted to be journalists were typically told that they were not allowed to write. So they could go work for Newsweek magazine or Time or the New York Times, but they would work in the mailroom, or they would be researchers, or they would be assistants. And back in those days, the kind of heyday of journalism, there were often these drink carts and mail carts. So the women could often be found, you know, in their high heels, in their 1950s, 1960s clothing, pushing mail carts, or actually maybe making cocktails and serving drinks. You know, that would never happen today, thank goodness. And these were really smart women. They wanted to be journalists. They were doing a lot of the same work as the men were, but they were told, you're not allowed to write. You can't have a byline. When it comes to actually writing the story, you're going to give all of your notes to the man, and the man's going to write it and have his name on it. And so at Newsweek, the women started gathering, first in secret. They would meet in the ladies' room, or they would meet after work, or on lunch breaks, and they started talking about this. And, you know, this was during the height of the women's movement. So feminism was in the air, there were revolts happening, and they started organizing. And they wanted to be writers, and they wanted to be treated equally to the men. So what ended up happening was they staged this kind of epic rebellion, and they hired a lawyer, and they filed a complaint with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and it was actually the first time that a gender suit like this had been brought. And so it was under Title IX, or no, it was under Title VII, sorry, that they were able to argue that this was actually a form of discrimination. And the way
Civil
that they
rights.
revealed it was so amazing. Yes, was so amazing because the male editors of the magazine had assigned a story about the women's movement. But naturally, since the women on staff weren't allowed to write, it didn't get assigned to anyone on staff. And so actually the same week that Newsweek magazine had a cover story, and it's this amazing, I wish I have it somewhere in my apartment, I should have brought it, but it's this amazing cover image of a woman with her arm raised, and the headline across the front is "Women in Revolt." And so the same day that that article hit newsstands, the women of Newsweek held a press conference, and they held up a copy of the magazine, and they said, "We're suing Newsweek magazine for gender discrimination." And it got a lot of attention, and it got a lot of publicity, and it actually kind of sparked this ripple effect and this domino effect where almost every single other major newspaper and magazine came after that. The women at the New York Times started organizing, and the women at Sports Illustrated and Time Magazine started organizing. And kind of one by one, they filed these suits until it was made a rule that there had to be women on the masthead. And so throughout this process, I've become close with a number of the women who were involved in that original Newsweek lawsuit, one of whom was the first female senior editor at the magazine. And it's been interesting to learn from them and to hear what it was like back then, but also to see how in many subtle ways things are not that different.
So let's talk a little bit about that, about how things are not that different. I have to tell you that I teach is know your history and you can create the future of your choice. In fact, it's the first power tool because I think it's that important. And so thank you for sharing that history, because it truly is something that has been very much lost or only known to people who do remember it happening at that time. And you're right, as they say, the solution to the problem changes the problem. And we still have a lot of implicit bias in the system. We still have some overt discrimination as well, but a lot of it is it's more complicated. It's harder to identify, and it's harder to actually deal with very often. So let's move into talking about some of that. And you know, the whole there's a whole pop culture language now, as we were beginning to discuss, about the Manterrupting and oh gosh, you know, manspreading and procreating and all of these things. And so let's talk about where do those come from? Why is this happening now? Why is that kind of language, and why are those particular, in a way that's just almost as strong as that lawsuit was 40 years ago?
Yeah, well, you know, it was interesting when I was reporting out the story about the lawsuit. This was in 2010. I remember speaking with the women, and one of them saying, you know, back then when something was sexist or when you were experiencing sexism in the workplace, it was awful, but at least you knew what it was. Because if a guy was slapping your ass or telling you that you were not allowed to write at a publication that was about writing, you knew that that was unfair. But today, it's a little bit harder to identify. And so I think in our cases and in a lot of women's cases, it's so subtle, you know, maybe you're not speaking as loudly as the guy next to you, or maybe your ideas aren't being heard, but you're putting them out there. Nobody's saying overtly that you're not allowed to be a journalist, or we're not going to promote you as fast or give you as much money as the man next to you, but you notice that it's happening. And I think as women, we often have the tendency to turn inward, and I know that I did that to a large degree, wondering if my ideas just weren't as good enough, or maybe I wasn't pitching them as well, and that's why I wasn't moving up the ladder. But I think it's important, and you mentioned the pop culture vocabulary, I think that what these words do is create a catchy way of talking about what's happening. And it's really hard to explain how you're in a meeting and you said an idea and someone interrupted you and you felt like he was talking over you. You know, it's hard to explain that in any kind of concrete way and kind of present your case. But now with something like Manterrupting, you can say it and everybody knows exactly what it means. And it's kind of funny, it's fun to say, it's playful, and I think people listen when you talk about it, and hopefully they don't interrupt.
Right. And you indicated that you've had some of those experiences yourself. Is there any one that you could share?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, there have been plenty of times when I've been in a pitch meeting, and so as a journalist, you know, the way that it typically worked was you would go into these big morning editorial meetings, and there would be a big long table with everyone crowded around, and people would have to just say their ideas on the spot. You'd pitch your ideas. So all eyes were on you. It was very nerve-wracking, and you know, you needed to own what you were saying, and if somebody interrupted you, I would often just shrink into myself and think that I deserved to be interrupted. So there were a few things that would happen in the dynamics of those meetings that I think are indicative of this. And some of it is a lot of what Sheryl Sandberg talks about in Lean In, which is, you know, all the men would be crowded around the table. The women would not sit at the table. I would stand in a back corner, almost as if I didn't want to be seen. And when I was called on, I would state my idea, but I would be kind of trembling. My voice would be trembling. I'd be bright red. I'd be nervous. And so it was easy for somebody to interrupt me or to take the idea and repeat it in a different way that sounded more authoritative. And you know, I don't know whose fault is that. On some level, mine. But providing names for these things actually gives you a way to identify it. And so I think over time I've developed more confidence, but I've also learned kind of tricks of the trade in dealing with this type of situation.
Well, what you described does seem to be the universal experience for women. It's almost like as inevitable as death and taxes. I've so far never run into a woman that when I ask the question, have you ever had the experience of giving an idea in a meeting and nobody pays attention to it, and then 10 minutes later a man says the same thing and everyone cheers, or there's almost not a so far I have not encountered a single woman who has not had that experience at some time in her life. And just as with the issue of men taking up more space by the man-spreading phenomenon, boys are still, and men are still socialized to make themselves large. Women are still socialized to make themselves smaller, and we're rewarded for being smaller. So there actually are physical things that we learn from the moment we're born that continue to contribute to that phenomenon. We have a few slides to illustrate some of these things that you're talking about, Jessica. So let's take a look at some of them and see to further elucidate on some of these things, like man spreading. Let's see if we make this all work. There we are. There's the man spread. I don't know if you read the article by the journalist who spent a week on the New York subway system sitting like a man. And she literally said by the end of the week, yeah, there you go, there's that picture. She was feeling more powerful. That simply taking up that additional space made her personally feel like she had more power and capability. And then there's the bropriating terms. I love that. I mean, I just love that. I think that's just a great way of explaining what it is. So it's more than just being interrupted. It's actually having your ideas being someone else taking credit for your ideas, and learning how to deal with those phenomena is something that every woman needs to do. Jessica, you commented on it may be partly your fault, but I don't think there's fault here. I think it's just a matter of socialization, and that once we can name it, then we can actually do something about it. And clearly, it's about power. Clearly, it's about asserting power and how power is asserted or not. And men, again, have traditionally been socialized to use power, the power of language and the language of power. as key ways of controlling other people. And one of the things that we at Take the Lead do is to teach women how to recognize the power that they have to actually take control of these situations and to shift the whole paradigm of power from that controlling kind of power to what we call the power to. And I find women resonate with that, and once we start talking about that, then the women are more willing to take those positions of power and to use their voices in a more productive way. We have a question here that I want to ask you if I can read it well. Okay, all right. Lisa in Chandler, Arizona has a question, and her question is, she says, if we're trying to be inclusive, do we feel like using certain terms will help or hurt the cause of creating awareness of gender communications issues? So how do we as women then try to create more inclusiveness, since we're not trying to shout down the men? What we're trying to do is open up the conversation so that everyone has an equal place at the table and an equal place in it.
Right.
We just lost your sound for a moment there, Jessica. Can you hear me now?
I'm back. Yes, I'm back.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, great.
I think it's a really good question, and one that I have heard before, and a criticism that I've heard when the piece came out. So when I wrote the piece for Time about Manterrupting, it went completely viral. I did not expect it. It's probably, it's one of those things that I wrote relatively quickly and got more clicks than anything I've ever written. Many things that I've spent months on.
The passion came out.
Yes,
that's why.
Exactly. But I actually think that the reason why that happened is because Manterrupting is a catchy, fun-to-say term. Is it putting the emphasis on men as the bad guys? Yes. And is that fair? No, not necessarily. Men do interrupt more than women do, but it's certainly an overly simplistic term. But I guess my feeling is, and I've actually spoken with linguists about this, is that you have to be able to you have to be able to identify these behaviors in a way that people will remember. And the fact that there are words like manspreading or manterrupting, even if they're putting the fault on men in the terminology itself, have prompted this huge cultural conversation that we were not having before at all. And so I guess my feeling is, the terms are a bit simplistic, and I think that you use the terms as a way to get into the conversation, and then you expand the conversation to be more nuanced. But if people are going to talk about it, I think that's really the first step. And it's hard to get people to talk about these issues, not everyone wants to. I have a male friend who constantly manterrupts me, and I call him out for it now, and he thinks it's hilarious and now calls other people out for manterrupting and uses the term all the time. So I don't think it necessarily has to be sort of hostile. It can be playful in a way, and I also think that most of the men who are doing it probably don't realize and don't want to be doing it. They really want to be good guys and want to be helping push for women to be equal and getting a seat at the table and speaking up as well. But it's almost about highlighting some of the stuff we do unconsciously.
That's a really great point. Evil, I don't think we have any need to think that it's evil intent. I have to tell you, my husband actually taught me how to interrupt. When I first started doing talk radio, and I would often be in a situation where I would be up against a male on the other side of the issue, and he would just roll over me like a steam truck, and my husband literally sat me down and taught me how to interrupt. And what I learned, however, and I'd love for you to address this, is that as a woman, I had to interrupt in a different way than men could. I had to know exactly when was the right moment, not too soon, not too late, and I had to do it with a smile on my face. And just in general, I had to, it wasn't going to work for me to emulate how a man interrupts a woman. It only worked for me if I used a different kind of affect. So could you address that? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, and this is one of those subjects that is always tricky because the fact that you have to use a different affect is not fair. It means that there still is gender bias in the world. But the reality is that there are studies that show that if you do use perhaps a more feminine affect, you're going to be more likely to get what you want. So, you know, whether it's interrupting or whether it's negotiating for a raise, a lot of what the research shows is that you're more likely to do well if you do it with a smile or if you almost play into the feminine stereotypes in some way, because the reality is that we still live in a gendered world and women are expected to be nurturing and nice and warm, and men are expected to be authoritative and leaders. And so, you know, some of what I've learned over time is that you do have to use this kind of language and this kind of affect, and it is probably likely to be successful, but you may not agree with the fact that you're doing it in the first place.
Well, I have a question for you from Sunny Riegelman from Austin, Texas. And this question is actually about, she says she had a boss, a female boss, who called her Shrill. And she said, I couldn't believe that she didn't realize how discriminatory that was. So the question that she asked is, how do you recommend addressing issues of female colleagues who aren't aware that they have the same implicit biases that the men do?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really good point, because we do have them. I mean, all of us have them as a culture. You know, it's always tricky approaching a boss about something like this, but I think in the case of a man or a woman, if they're using a gendered term like that, the question is, you know, would you ever call a man shrill? Or what's the male equivalent of being shrill? That's the kind of term that you hear thrown around a lot when it's in reference to women who speak up or women in power. You know, that and strident, I feel like, are two of these terms that you frequently hear with, you know, people like Hillary Clinton. Abrasive, yes. And
yes.
And they're not terms that you hear with regard to men. And so at the simplest level, saying, you know, would you ever call a man shrill, may be effective. I think that you have to assess your own situation and the response of the person. But maybe nicely trying to open up that conversation about the language, or maybe even in a separate setting, mentioning something about how the language differs for men and women. So I work with Sheryl Sandberg in one of my many capacities as an editor for her women's organization, and they of course put out the Ban Bossy campaign. And the idea behind that was not actually to ban the word bossy, but to draw attention to the fact that when women are authoritative or when they are leaders, they're often called bossy or aggressive or too assertive, whereas men are just simply seen as leaders or bosses. And so that campaign itself drew a lot of controversy. People didn't want to ban the word. Some people wanted to reclaim the word. I think that all of those are completely valid arguments, but what it did do was draw attention to the fact that this is a term that is only used for women. I've never heard it used about a man or a boy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of my favorite power tools of the 9 power tools is embrace controversy. And sometimes the best way you can get people talking about something that needs to be dealt with is to actually create controversy. There are controversies that you make and controversies that you take just because they happen to you. But the Ban Bossy campaign is a great example. And Take the Lead participated in it very aggressively. Yes, aggressively, not just assertively, but aggressively, because we thought it was such a great idea to get people talking about something that they really needed to talk about. So let's move on here to the bropriating issue. As I said before, I mean, this really seems to be a universal experience. What examples have you observed, and is there a situation where you think it was handled really well when someone, say a man or men, took a credit or repeated an idea that a woman had given and was not given, and she was not given credit for it, but the man was given credit and applauded for it? Have you seen examples of positive and productive ways to deal with that?
Well, it's hard. I've definitely seen this happen, and I've heard about it from friends who've experienced it. I've had it happen in the sense that I would pitch a story idea, it would get rejected, and then a man would pitch the same story idea and it would get approved. And in that case, I don't know whether or not the man had heard my story idea. He could have perfectly well come up with the same idea on his own, but something about the delivery meant that he got the assignment and I did not. So I think that talking about these issues so that if a person is taking credit for another's work, they notice it, is important, because I do think some of this is unconscious. There's also research to show that actually giving credit to other people makes you look better in a workplace scenario, and so it benefits you and it benefits the person. And then, of course, there's the idea of bystanders or somebody interjecting and saying, yeah, that's what Jessica said a moment ago. I think what she was saying, or using that as some transitional way of bringing it back to the person who came up with the idea. So I think that there's things that other people can do to halt that behavior, but the first step, of course, is noticing that it's even happening.
Well, I want to take a moment here and just remind people that we really appreciate to encourage send it in. Either you can tweet it to us or you can use the Q&A chat on your screen just below the live stream, and we'd love to hear from you, and we'll keep taking these questions as long as we can this evening. One person told me in a situation like that she had said to the man in question who was repeating her idea and getting the credit for it, that she just went over to him and put her hand on his shoulder and said, "Fantastic. I so appreciate that you're supporting my idea." I kind of like that, I mean, then message delivered, and it put her in a very good place. So we have a question here from Janet in Arizona. We have lots of folks from Arizona tonight. Hi there. What are some good phrases that when you know it's time to stop someone from interrupting you? What are some good phrases that you've heard that women can use in those situations?
I have to admit, I have talked about this more than I've actually seen it in practice, and now that I'm freelance, I work from home, so I'm not in a lot of business meetings. And I think that this is a conversation that has only recently been happening, so I'm not sure that a ton of people are actually practicing this yet. But, I think you can say something like, "Oh, I really want to hear what Jessica had to say. Can we let her finish?" And oftentimes, what I've done in situations is I've actually made kind of an informal pact with a male colleague who I knew did support me, so that he could support what I was saying in the meeting. So maybe if he interrupted the interrupter to say, "Hold on, I really want to hear what Jessica has to say," that might actually be more effective. So I think you can actually interrupt the person who's doing the interrupting as a third party. It's tough if you're the person being interrupted to say, "Hey, what the hell?" Because it probably makes you look, quote unquote, pushy or aggressive, and you're keeping in mind that there are all these stereotypes we have about men and women in the workplace. But certainly, I think that many women more and more are just starting to push back and saying, "Hold on, dude, let me finish."
I like that phrase. "Hold on, dude, let me finish." Maybe we should have these little cards. We should have flashcards, perhaps,
yes,
that say, "Hold on, dude, let me finish." Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that you raised, though, very seriously here, is that it's very worthwhile to think ahead for about what's going to happen at that meeting, and to think in advance. And just like with any other situation where you're trying to make something happen, to make sure that you've aligned with people who will support you and you can support them in return, and to think proactively about that, and sort of think the meeting out in your mind beforehand, particularly if there's an agenda item or a solution to a problem or a new project or something that you particularly want to make sure that that is heard in the meeting. And so being proactive about it and sort of playing the meeting out in your mind before you go into it, and make sure that you have aligned with your tribe, as you said, aligned with someone who you know will support you, and you can support that individual. Thinking of that all in advance really does help make it happen in a smoother way, so that it again, it doesn't become combative, but it actually can help the organization. I mean, you get better solutions when you get all these ideas out on the table. So it actually is a help. You're helping the organization. You're not just being self-serving. You're actually helping something better happen as a result of that meeting. And one of the things I've learned is that it's important to women to feel that what they're doing is doing something positive, not just being combative. And if we go into it with that mindset, it's really very helpful. Is there anything else in that vein that you'd like to talk about? Because I'd like to move on and hear something about the book that you're going to be writing, and where you're going to be heading from here with these ideas, because you've become a real, you're really a voice for these ideas about manterrupting and appropriating and all these things we've been talking about tonight. So where are you heading from here, and how about telling us about what you're going to write about?
Well, so I just sold my first book to HarperCollins based on some of these themes, and it's called Feminist Fight Club, and it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek illustrated guide to battling sexism in the workplace. So it's a lot of what we've been talking about here, identifying some of the challenges, tackling them in a way that has some humor, but really rooting all of the solutions in research and scholarly research, and trying to translate that for a broad audience. I think that there are tricks and hacks that we can learn to try to get ahead in a workplace or deal with some of these issues that happen on a daily basis, and to identify them. So hopefully what I'm going to do is provide a kind of a field guide for that, with some fun illustrations as well.
I think that's going to be a book that every woman of every age is going to want to read, and will be, as you say, a handbook. It sounds fantastic. So congratulations. Can't wait to see it. When did you say it's coming out? Not
until spring of 2016. So we have a while. It just happened.
Well,
but
I'll be waiting.
To get to work.
We'll be waiting with bated breath.
Thank you.
Perhaps you'd like people to send you ideas.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Oh yeah, ideas are always helpful. In your career and in where you are right now, what's the best piece of advice that anybody ever gave you?
I used to, back in the old Newsweek offices, before Newsweek went out of business, and then back in business, and then out of print, and then back in print, I had an actual office with a view, very luxurious. Now I work from my bedroom, and I shared a wall. Exactly. I shared a wall with somebody who became a great friend of mine, a man, and he had the office next to me, and his name was Adam, and Adam basically could argue for anything, and he never backed down, and he just had this confidence that I always admired, and also sometimes thought was obnoxious, but envied. And so in a lot of situations, I still find myself saying, what would Adam do? What would Adam do? And thinking about what Adam would have done, or what Adam would have told me to do. And he thinks it's hilarious that I tell this story, but sometimes I actually think to myself, like, what would a man do in this situation? And then assessing what I was going to do versus that, and probably coming to somewhere in the middle, a happy medium, because I still want it to reflect me, but not to be passive. And so that's one thing that I tend to do pretty frequently.
Thank you. That's great. I have a question for you from Barbara in Birmingham, Alabama. She says, do you think there are some self-destructive linguistic trends that are making women more of a target of manterruption, using words like kinda, sorta, up-talking, and vocal fry?
Yes, that's a great question. Yes, completely, and I even notice myself doing it on a regular basis. So to give a little background for people who might not know, vocal fry is when women, it's more frequently women, tend to extend their words. So hi, and they have that kind of fry at the end of it. And uptalk is when you end a statement in a question. So I'm not really sure, going up at the end of the sentence in a higher pitched tone. And I think that we're socialized to speak like that in a lot of ways because you don't hear men doing it, but every woman I know does it. And I think that you're absolutely right. If you're speaking in a way that sounds like you don't even believe what's coming out of your mouth, then why is anyone else in the meeting going to believe what you're saying? So I think speaking with authority is really important and probably changes the way people listen and whether or not they do interrupt, because you kind of first have to own it yourself before you're going to convince other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And
also apologizing before you speak. Sorry, I'm not sure if this is right. Oh, sorry, but can I say something? That sort of thing drives me crazy.
And those are things that are difficult to sort of wring out of our speech patterns. They're very difficult. I can tell other people to do it. I can make a list of the things that should be done, but like you say, I find myself doing it as well, even as many years as I have been doing public speaking and leading organizations, and it's very, very difficult to change, but you can change it, and once you know it, you can change it. And sometimes just doing a recording of yourself at a meeting. Just record a meeting sometime and then listen back to it and listen to how you sound and see what you think, if you like it or if you don't like it. We have another question here. This is a question, the person did not leave her name, but the question is, or his name, do you know if any particular industry or sector is worse at manterrupting?
I don't think I know for sure based on statistics, but I would guess that it's worse in the business world, and I would guess in more male-dominated industries where there's probably less women in the room. They're less used to hearing women talk. Women don't interrupt as much as a rule. They don't interrupt men or women as much, and men actually interrupt men and women more. So probably in industries like publishing that are very female-dominated, it comes up less.
Well, another journalist I greatly admire, Amanda Marcotte, wrote an article in Slate today about the city council in Austin, Texas, which has, for the first time, has a female majority, just barely. 11 city council people and 7 of them are women. And apparently the city manager thought it was important to hire someone to come in and to train the city council members in what they were going to need to know, since there would be a female majority, and told them things like, you know, the women talk a lot, they ask too many questions. So politics. One of the reasons that women give for not wanting to go into politics is that whole dynamic of the hard nose, you know, I don't want to be confronted that way. So what would you say to a woman who says, I don't want to be involved in politics, I don't like politics because, you know, I don't like the way people talk with each other?
Politics will never change if we don't go into it. You know, if we want to have more women in politics, we have to suck it up and try to enter into it. So I don't know, I would say take on the challenge.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you. I hope everyone takes that to heart, because you're absolutely right. We can't make the change unless we make the change. And again, if we as women can think about the fact that it actually makes life better for the next woman coming along if we do go ahead and step into the fray and participate in that conversation, no matter how difficult it might be, then we will really see a lot of progress. What would you tell an aspiring young journalist who wants to know what you think has been most helpful to you, and she wants to be able to take her place at the table. And in the field of journalism, what would you tell that aspiring young journalist?
I feel like journalism can be tough because it's subjective. So, you have an editor deciding if they like your idea, or you have a different editor deciding if they like your writing, and one person's taste may not be another person's. So I guess my best advice is to just keep plugging, write as much as you possibly can, try to learn from the people who are getting their ideas published, and try to follow that format. And if this becomes an issue in a journalism setting, talk to the other women who are there, and talk about these issues. I think that journalism is a competitive field, and it's a tough time right now, but there's also a lot of opportunity right now because of the internet, and there's no space constraints online, and there's a lot of opportunity to do online blogging, writing, social media stuff in every form. So get to know as much as you can about all the platforms.
Great. Well, it's time for us to do something that we do in every one of our virtual happy hours, and that is we try to make sure that we leave people with some very specific tools and tips and takeaways that they can use. And we've already talked about a lot of those, but in your article, you had a very cool infographic with a whole bunch of great tips that can be very helpful to people trying to navigate the world in which they may be manterrupted or appropriated. So, Jessica, I was wondering if you would just take a couple of minutes and walk people through some of your favorite ones of those tools and tips.
Yeah, sure. So the first one, establish a no interruption rule for everyone at the table. This is something that bosses can do. If I'm a colleague or somebody in a lower position, I'm not going to be able to establish this rule. But if you're a person in power, if you become a person in power, you can actually say, we're making a no interruption rule here, and everyone has to follow it. Bystander intervention, that's the one I mentioned, interrupting the interrupter, saying, hey, hold on, I want to hear what Jess has to say, or wait a second, let her finish. And then supporting companies with women in power. I think that the more women who are leading, the less an issue these types of things become. And I think that part of the reason why gender bias still exists and why there's so much competition often among women in a workplace setting is that we have this feeling that there's just one or two spots at the table or at the top of the masthead or at the top of the company for a woman, because so many of our companies are still male dominated. But if you got rid of that, if it was just a meritocracy and there was room for everybody, then I think that you could start supporting each other rather than fighting against each other. So I think that companies who have women in power, we should support them in every way we can, and actually they do better. Like, all of the research shows that companies that are more diverse have better returns. So it's good from a business perspective, and it's good from a gender equality perspective.
Absolutely. Those are great tips. And the reason we always make sure that we talk about and give people some very specific takeaways and tools and tips is that it's really time, I think, for us to shift the narrative in our own minds from the problem focus and what you described as this sort of feeling that there could be only one woman at the top, or that there's a limited amount of opportunity for leadership and power. And in truth, it's really a finite pie. And it's really not a finite pie. It's not a situation where if I take a slice, there's less for you. One thing women are really good at is baking more pies. And if I help you, we end up both having more power, we end up both having more capability, and both of us are more likely to ascend to the positions we would like to hold. So the first step in getting there is to change the narrative in our own minds from a constant focus on the problem to focus on solutions like the ones we're talking about right now. I've developed a workshop that I have to tell you is probably quickly become my favorite one to do, and I call it Gender Bilingual Communication. And we can do this with Take the Lead, can do this either with men and women together. It's a lot of fun that way, and it's also great to do with women by themselves. I haven't done it with men by themselves, but I suspect it would be equally good. So to add to the tips that you've just given, I'll kick in with a few of my own to share with people that they can use as takeaways. And we have also talked about several of these, but I want to start with one that is it's about defining your own terms, because we're all going to be defined. So it's best to define your own terms first before someone else defines you. And that means that whoever defines the terms usually ends up either winning the debate, if there's a debate over something, or at least ends up getting her voice heard. And she who sets the agenda is generally able to help make happen in that meeting what she thinks needs to happen. It takes some courage to do that very often, but it's one of those things that makes all the difference. And leadership is more about creating meaning for people and defining those terms than almost anything else that a leader does. The second one is a piece of advice that I got from a man many, many years ago when I was completely unwilling to state my own intention for leadership. And he just looked at me and he said, "Ask for it by name. Ask for it by name." We as women are so often socialized to speak in indirect terms. And so, yeah, look, this is what I'd like to figure out how we're going to get there, is the second tip that I would share. And the third one is one that we have already talked about, which is to be aware of our own speaking style. And we've discussed the upspeak and the vocal fry and the apologizing and the sort of language, tentative language. So those are the tips and tools that I'd like to share with people to take with them. And is there anything else you'd like to add, Jessica, to the takeaways that you've given people? Because they've really been fantastic.
I'm so glad. No, I think you covered it. It's great.
Well, so we have one last question for you. And that is, what is your personal go-to song or quote that gets you powered up to achieve the goals for women that you would like for them to have? What keeps you going?
I like that song TKO by Le Tigre. TKO for knockout. What does that stand for? Total knockout. That's my get reared up song. I'm gonna go listen to it now because I haven't heard it, so I'm gonna have to go listen to it. Thank you. We're keeping a list of those. We're actually going to make a whole playlist of the favorite songs that people have that power them up, because well, we all want to get to leadership parity by #25 not 95. So thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you. I can't tell you how fabulous this has been, and I know that people are going to be watching and rewatching this because the advice that you've given and the background information that you've given is just absolutely stellar and invaluable. So thank you so much. Good luck to you with the book. We'll all be anxiously and eagerly awaiting it and supporting you and wanting to help you make it a huge success. And maybe you'll come back and talk to us again then. So we have just a few final quick announcements. First, just to say thank you to everybody who's joined the virtual happy hour. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I know you've gotten a lot of great takeaways. We'll see you next month for Jamia Wilson. And stay connected with us, folks. We'll put up our slide again so that you can see all of our social media. Come to talk to us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, at Take Lead Women. Facebook and LinkedIn are both Take the Lead Women, and our website is taketheleadwomen.com. Also, our Take the Lead community on Mighty Bell. And we'd love to continue hearing from you, talking with you, and we want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear what topics you'd like for us to include in the next virtual happy hour.
And we'd love for you to join us in many different kinds of ways. Signing up for our newsletter, our weekly newsletter. Please do check out 9 Leadership Power Tools to Accelerate Your Career, our online certificate course to power up and accelerate your career. It's all asynchronous. You can take it from anywhere. It's going to start July 26th, and it'll run for 4 weeks. And you know, in the summertime, we're always thinking about where can we, what are we going to do? Are we going to clean out the closets? Are we going to get a little rejuvenation, get a little rest and recreation? Well, one of the ways we can do that is by learning some things that will really help us accelerate our career. So that's why we're doing the Power Tools online certificate course starting July 26th and running for 4 weeks. And I'll be interacting with participants in it throughout. Evenly, you guys know that Take the Lead is your resource for yourself, for your organization, for leadership development courses, for workshops, for keynotes, online and in person. We'll work with you to customize whatever will work best to help you. We want to work together to make sure that women reach leadership parity by 2025. Thank you so much. See you next month. Until then, power to you.